and welcome. Tonight, we're stepping into the real Wild West. Not the Hollywood version with its heroic cowboys and dramatic showdowns, but the gritty, unforgiving reality where survival was a daily struggle and comfort was a luxury few could afford. This is a journey into a world that has been romanticized beyond recognition. And tonight, we'll strip away the mythology to reveal what life was truly like on the American frontier of the 1870s. Before we begin, if you find value in these explorations of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps more than you might imagine, and it allows us to continue bringing these stories to light. Now, settle in. Let the modern world fade away. Tonight, we travel back to a time when every day was a test of endurance, when the landscape was as beautiful as it was deadly, and when the gap between legend and reality was wider than the prairies themselves. Imagine that you've woken up in the American Wild West of the 1870s. The transition is jarring, immediate, and uncomfortable. Before you even open your eyes, the first sensation hits you with unexpected force. The smell. Not the clean, earthy aroma of nature you might have anticipated, but something far more pungent, almost overwhelming. It is the stench of unwashed bodies, animal waste, and what might be raw sewage, all hanging heavy in the still air. You see, bathing was not a priority in the Wild West. It was, in fact, a luxury that most could not afford. Water was precious in this land, needed for drinking and cooking, and using it to clean oneself seemed wasteful, almost frivolous. Most settlers considered a thorough wash a monthly event, and that estimate was generous. Some went entire winters without a proper bath, their bodies accumulating layers of grime, sweat, and dust that became as much a part of them as their own skin dot as you drag yourself from your bed. A crude affair consisting of a straw-filled mattress that crackles with every movement. You realize that the mattress itself is alive with bed bugs. These tiny parasites have made their home in the fabric and straw, and they've been feeding on you throughout the night. The bites itch terribly, but this is simply a fact of frontier life, an annoyance so common that few even remarked upon it. Your body aches in ways you've never experienced. Every muscle feels strained, every joint protests movement. Life in the 1870s frontier involved constant physical labor from the moment the sun rose until long after it set. There were no weekends, no vacation days, no concept of work-life balance. Whether you were a farmer breaking virgin prairie, a miner digging in the darkness, or a ranch hand managing livestock, your body was your primary tool, used relentlessly until it broke down. The work was not merely difficult. It was backbreaking in the most literal sense. Men and women in their 30s often walked with the posture of the elderly, their spines permanently curved from years of stooping, lifting, and hauling. Arthritis was not a disease of old age, but a condition that afflicted people while they were still in what should have been their prime. The average lifespan hovered around 35 years. And looking at the physical demands of daily existence, it becomes clear why. You stand on the rough wooden floor, feeling splinters catch at your feet. The chill in the air is penetrating. If this is winter, your cabin might be 20 degrees below freezing inside. The fire in the hearth, if you have one, would have been allowed to burn down overnight to conserve fuel, which was often as precious as water. There is no central heating, no thermal underwear, no escape from the bone-deep cold that seems to come from the earth itself. If this is summer, the situation is equally uncomfortable, though in a different way. The heat would be stifling, oppressive, turning the cabin into an oven. You would sweat through every piece of clothing you own, and there would be no relief, no air conditioning, no electric fan, just the faint hope of a breeze through the gaps in the walls. Speaking of clothing, you look down at what you're wearing and realize how different it is from anything you've known. Men typically owned perhaps 2 sets of clothes, rough canvas or denim pants that were stiff and uncomfortable, and cotton shirts that chafed against skin that had not yet developed the calluses and toughness of a frontier dweller. Women wore multiple layers regardless of the temperature. Chemises, corsets that constricted breathing and movement, petticoats, and long dresses that dragged in the dirt, collecting dust and mud with every step. Everything was scratchy, ill-fitting, and rarely cleaned. The fancy outfits you've seen in Western films, the pristine shirts and perfectly tailored vests, were pure fiction for the average person. Most frontier folk wore their clothes until they literally fell apart, patching and mending them repeatedly before finally discarding them. Your stomach growls, a hollow, urgent sensation that reminds you it's time for breakfast. But don't expect variety. Hope you like beans, biscuits, and coffee, because you'll be eating them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The Wild West diet was monotonous to the point of cruelty and nutritionally deficient in ways that would horrify. Modern nutritionists thought fresh fruits and vegetables were seasonal luxuries, available for only a few months of the year. The rest of the time, you subsisted on preserved foods or simply went without. Meat, when available, was preserved with salt or smoke because refrigeration did not exist. The heavy salt content was necessary to prevent spoilage, but it came with its own health consequences. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was common among settlers. Your gums would bleed, your teeth would loosen and eventually fall out. Old wounds would reopen, and your mind would grow confused. This was easily preventable with fresh citrus or vegetables, but such things were often unavailable for months at a time. The disease was so common that many simply accepted it as an inevitable part of frontier life. The coffee, at least, provides a jolt of caffeine, though it bears little resemblance to what you would recognize as coffee. It has been boiled to within an inch of its life, bitter beyond belief. Some people added crushed eggshells or even salt to reduce the bitterness, creating a brew that was more about function than flavor. Still, the caffeine helps, and you drink it without complaint, knowing you'll need every bit of energy for the day ahead. Before stepping outside, you learn to check your shoes. This is a habit born from painful experience. Scorpions and snakes often seek shelter during the night, and your boots, warm and dark, make an ideal hiding place. You shake them vigorously, and when nothing falls out, you consider yourself fortunate. A venomous bite out here, miles from any medical help, could easily mean death. You step outside your cabin, and the landscape opens before you. It is breathtaking in its vastness, in its raw, untamed beauty. The sky seems impossibly large, stretching from horizon to horizon without interruption. The land rolls away in every direction, grass or scrub or forest or desert, depending on where you found yourself. It is magnificent, and it is terrifying. This landscape is unforgiving. Extreme weather can appear with little warning. Blizzards sweep down from the north, blinding and freezing. Tornadoes form with such speed that you might have only minutes to find shelter. Flash floods can turn dry creek beds into raging torrents in the span of an afternoon. Drought can persist for months, turning the land to dust and destroying everything you've worked to build. The sky might be clear now, a perfect blue dome overhead. But that could change in minutes. There are no weather forecasts, no warnings on your phone, no emergency alert systems. You read the sky with your own eyes. Watch the behavior of animals, feel the change in the wind, and hope that your instincts are correct. If you've settled near a frontier town, you might think that civilization offers some protection, some buffer against the harshness of this land. In some ways, you would be right. In many others, you would discover that towns simply present different dangers that are in some ways more insidious than the open wilderness. Towns in the Wild West were hotbeds of disease. Without proper sewage systems or any understanding of germ theory, illnesses spread through communities with terrifying speed. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis. These were not rare diseases, but constant threats that lurked in every shared space, every handshake. Every breath of air in a crowded room got an outbreak could decimate a town in a matter of weeks. Half the population might die, and those who survived would be left to bury the dead and wonder if they would be next. There was no treatment, no cure, only the desperate hope that the disease would pass you by. You decide to visit the nearest town, and as you approach, you notice immediately that it lacks the organized layout you might have expected. Many Western towns grew haphazardly, buildings constructed wherever it seemed convenient, with no thought for proper planning or infrastructure. There is no grid system, no careful zoning, just a collection of structures that sprouted up as people arrived and claimed space. The streets are not paved. They are dirt tracks that transform into mud pits when it rains and dust bowls when the weather turns dry. Walking through them, your feet sink into the soft earth, and you realize that in wet weather, this would be almost impassable. A quagmire that could trap wagons and exhaust horses. The smell hits you again, stronger now. Horse manure is everywhere. Horses are the primary mode of transportation, and their waste accumulates in the streets. There are no street cleaners, no sanitation departments, no one whose job it is to remove the waste. In some heavily trafficked areas, the accumulated manure could be knee-deep, a festering mass that attracts flies and spreads disease. The flies are constant, swarming around you in clouds. They land on your face, your hands, your food. They carry disease from the waste in the streets to everything they touch, and there is no way to escape them. You begin to understand viscerally why disease spreads so easily in these conditions. As you walk down the main street, you pass the saloon. It is one of the busiest establishments in town, a place where men gather to drink, gamble, and forget for a few hours the hardships of their lives. But contrary to Hollywood depictions, this is not a glamorous place with swinging doors and piano players. Most saloons were crude, one-room affairs with rough plank bars and basic furniture that had seen better days. The liquor served here is not fine, whiskey aged in oak barrels. It is raw alcohol, often mixed with tobacco juice, pepper, turpentine, or even gunpowder to give it extra kick. The mixture is dangerous. A single drink from a bad batch could blind you, damage your internal organs, or kill you outright. But men drink it anyway, seeking the temporary oblivion it provides. The saloon represents another deadly aspect of frontier life, violence. These establishments are frequently the sites of deadly confrontations, not because of formal duels or carefully orchestrated showdowns, but because of drunken arguments that escalate quickly in a heavily armed society. The romanticized gunfights of Western movies, two men facing each other in the street at high noon, were extraordinarily rare. Most violence was impulsive, messy, and over trivial matters. A perceived insult, a disputed card game, a woman's attention. These could all end in bloodshed. You notice that almost everyone carries a weapon of some kind, but the reasons are not what you might think. While personal protection is certainly a factor, weapons are primarily tools. They are used for hunting, for protection from wildlife, and sometimes for signaling. The constant threat from bears, wolves, mountain lions, and venomous snakes makes going unarmed foolish, especially when traveling between settlements. What surprises you is learning that many frontier towns actually had strict gun control laws. Places like Dodge City, Kansas, and Tombstone, Arizona, required visitors to surrender their firearms when entering town limits. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral actually started because the Clanton gang refused to comply with Tombstone's weapons ordinance. Despite what you've seen in countless films, quick-draw duels in the middle of the street were exceedingly rare. Most shootings were ambushes or happened during robberies. The skilled gunslinger facing off against an opponent at high noon, both men standing still, hands hovering over their holsters, is largely a Hollywood invention. Real frontier violence was typically sudden, chaotic, and lacked any sense of honor or fairness. As you continue your walk through town, you pass the local doctor's office. The sign above the door promises medical care, but what that means in the 1870s frontier would horrify you. Most doctors had little or no formal training. They might have apprenticed with another physician for a few months, or attended a medical college for a brief period. But their knowledge was limited and often based on theories that were fundamentally incorrect. Surgical procedures were performed without anesthesia beyond whiskey or morphine, if you were lucky. Sterilization was virtually unknown. The idea that invisible organisms could cause infection had not yet been widely accepted. Doctors operated with unwashed hands, using instruments that had been, at best, wiped clean on their aprons. Something as simple as an infected cut could lead to amputation or death. The treatment for a broken bone might leave you with a permanent limp or chronic pain. Common medical treatments included bloodletting, draining blood from a patient in the belief that it would restore the balance of humors in the body. Mercury compounds were prescribed for numerous conditions, despite the fact that mercury is highly toxic. Arsenic and other poisons were used as medicine, often doing more harm than good. Women in childbirth faced mortality rates as high as 1 in 4 in remote areas. Childbirth was the most dangerous thing a woman could do, and many women approached each pregnancy with the very real understanding that it might be their last act on earth. Men's diaries and letters from the period frequently mention the heartbreak of raising children alone after losing lives in childbirth. Dentistry involved extraction without anesthesia, using crude tools that looked more like torture implements than medical instruments. Most people suffered from painful dental issues for years before finally losing their teeth. By middle age, many frontier folk had few or no teeth remaining, which further complicated their already limited diet. If you were injured or fell ill on the frontier, your survival often depended more on luck than on medical intervention. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening due to infection. A splinter that went septic, a small cut that wouldn't heal, a tooth that abscessed. Any of these could kill you. Broken bones might never heal properly, leaving you with chronic pain and disability for the rest of your life. The famous phrase, "Only the strong survive," had literal meaning in the Wild West. If your body was not robust, if you were prone to illness, if you had any chronic condition, your chances of long-term survival were slim. Your stomach growls again, reminding you that it's time for lunch. You head to what passes for a restaurant, which is likely just an extension of someone's home, where meals are served for a fee. Don't expect variety. The food is not any more diverse than your breakfast. Meat, if available, is tough and often on the edge of spoilage, despite heavy smoking or salting. The preservation methods slow decay but cannot stop it entirely, and you learn to eat questionable meat rather than waste the resource. Vegetables, when they appear, are overcooked to mush, all texture and much of the nutritional value boiled away. Food safety standards do not exist, so dysentery and food poisoning are common occurrences that people simply learn to endure. While eating, you overhear conversations about recent troubles. Indian attacks, outlaw gangs, the danger of traveling alone. These are the constant topics of frontier discourse, the threats that occupy everyone's minds. While Native American violence against settlers was far less common than portrayed in popular culture. In fact, settlers and the U.S. military were far more likely to be the aggressors. The frontier is still a place of conflict. The systematic displacement of indigenous peoples has created tensions that sometimes erupt into violence on both sides. As for outlaws, they are a genuine threat, particularly in remote areas. Law enforcement is sparse. A single sheriff might be responsible for thousands of square miles. In many places, justice is handled through vigilante action rather than formal legal proceedings. Lynch mobs are common, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty often does not apply. If you are accused of horse theft or cattle rustling, you might find yourself hanging from a tree before sunset. Regardless of your actual guilt or innocence, after lunch, you decide to visit the local general store to stock up on supplies. The prices shock you. Basic necessities cost far more on the frontier than back east, due to the difficulty and expense of transportation. A simple can of peaches might cost the equivalent of $20 in today's money. Many settlers spend most of their income on essential supplies. With little left over for comfort or luxury. The store offers another glimpse into frontier reality. The isolation. Mail delivery is infrequent and unreliable. Newspapers might be weeks or months out of date. Information travels slowly, and you might go years without news from family back east. Many settlers never see their relatives again after moving west. The distance and expense of travel creating a permanent separation. A psychological toll of this. Isolation contributes to high rates of depression, alcoholism, and suicide among frontier populations. People are social creatures, and the profound loneliness of frontier life wears on the mind and spirit in ways that are difficult to articulate. As the afternoon wears on, you notice dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Weather on the frontier is not just uncomfortable, it can be deadly. Without modern forecasting, storms arrive with little warning. Blizzards can strand travelers, leading to freezing deaths within sight of shelter. Tornadoes destroy entire communities, leaving no emergency services to assist survivors. Flash floods wash away wagon trains and settlements that took months to build. Droughts ruin crops and cause starvation, turning the land to dust and driving people from their homes. If you are lucky enough to have a proper home, it provides minimal protection. Most frontier dwellings are hastily constructed from whatever materials are available. Sod houses on the plains built from blocks of prairie turf. Log cabins in forested regions. Simple wooden structures in towns. None are particularly effective against extreme weather. Winter temperatures inside can drop below freezing. You wake with frost on the inside of the walls, your breath visible in the air. Summer heat is often unbearable, especially in attics or upper floors where many people sleep. The roof radiates heat downward, turning sleeping quarters into ovens. As the storm approaches, you decide to head back to your cabin before it hits. On the way, you pass a group of men heading to work at the local mine. Mining is one of the deadliest professions on the frontier. Underground cave-ins, toxic gas exposure, explosions from improperly handled blasting powder, and machinery accidents claim countless lives. Miners also suffer from long-term health issues. Black lung from coal dust clogs their airways, making every breath a struggle. Mercury poisoning from gold processing causes tremors, mental confusion, and eventual death. The work destroys the body slowly, even when immediate disasters are avoided. Even if you avoid mining, few frontier occupations are safe. Farming involves dangerous equipment with no safety features. Ranching means working with unpredictable animals weighing hundreds of pounds. Logging has one of the highest fatality rates of any profession, with falling trees and sharp tools causing horrific injuries. Whatever you do to make a living, your risk of serious injury or death is exponentially higher than in the modern world. You make it back to your cabin just as the rain begins to fall. Within minutes, you discover that the roof leaks in several places. You place buckets to catch the water, grateful at least for the opportunity to refill your drinking water supply. Clean water is scarce and precious out here. Many frontier settlers drink from the same sources used for washing and watering livestock. These contaminated water supplies lead to waterborne illnesses that can quickly turn fatal. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. All are spread through tainted water, and all can kill you within days dot as you sit in your leaky cabin, listening to the rain drum on the roof and plink into the buckets. You reflect on how different reality is from the romanticized version of the Wild West. There are no heroes or villains here, just people struggling to survive in incredibly harsh conditions. The fact that anyone makes it through is a testament to human resilience and determination. Nightfall comes early. You have no electricity, no light switches to flip. Candles and oil lamps provide minimal illumination, and you are careful with them. Fire is a constant danger in frontier homes. A single spark could mean losing everything, with no fire department to call for help. Many towns burn to the ground, at least once in their history. The wooden structures going up like kindling. You prepare for bed, exhausted from just one day in the Wild West. Your muscles ache, your stomach is unsettled from the unfamiliar food, and your mind is overwhelmed by the constant vigilance required to stay alive. As you drift off to sleep, you wonder if you'll make it through tomorrow, or if you'll become just another statistic in the dangerous story of the American frontier. The wind howls outside your cabin, a haunting reminder of how small and vulnerable you are against the vastness of the untamed wilderness. Tomorrow, if you're lucky enough to see it, will bring all these challenges again, along with new ones you haven't yet imagined. Asterisk in the Wild West, survival is never guaranteed. It is earned day by day, hour by hour, through hardship that most modern people can scarcely comprehend. The morning light filters through the cracks in your cabin walls, waking you from a restless sleep. Your body aches from the hard mattress, the straw poking through the thin fabric, the bed bugs having feasted throughout the night. But there is no time to linger in whatever comfort this rough bed provides. The Wild West waits for no one, and another day of survival begins whether you are ready for it or not. As you rise, your muscles protest. Yesterday's harsh introduction to frontier life has left you sore in places you didn't know could hurt. You remember the smell, the food, the constant vigilance required just to make it through a single day. And you wonder what new challenges today will bring, what fresh hardships await in this unforgiving land. Let's say you decide to leave town today, to travel across the frontier. Perhaps you're heading to another settlement, joining a wagon train heading west, or simply exploring the vast territory that stretches in every direction. Whatever your reason, travel in the 1870s is an entirely different experience than what you're accustomed to. It is not merely uncomfortable. It is dangerous, exhausting, and often deadly. The good news, if you can call it that, is that by this time, the Transcontinental Railroad has been completed, connecting the east and west coasts of America. This engineering marvel, finished in 1869, has cut travel time from months to mere days. But here's the bad news. Unless you are relatively wealthy, or traveling between major cities, you probably cannot afford to use it. Railroad tickets are expensive, far beyond the means of most frontier folk. The average worker would need to save for months to afford passage, and even then, the railroad only serves specific routes, specific destinations. If you need to go somewhere off the main lines, you're on your own. Most frontier people travel by horse, by wagon, or simply on foot. Each method comes with its own set of challenges and dangers. If you own a horse, consider yourself fortunate. Horses are expensive to buy and maintain, putting them out of reach for many settlers. A good horse might cost the equivalent of several months' wages, and that's just the purchase price. Then you need saddles, bridles, feed, and veterinary care. Though veterinary care often means shooting the animal if it breaks a leg or develops certain illnesses that cannot be treated. Riding itself is no pleasure cruise, no romantic journey across pristine landscapes. Saddles in the 1870s are not designed for comfort, but for function. They are hard, unforgiving contraptions that leave even experienced riders with blisters, chafing, and aching muscles after just a few hours. Long days in the saddle can cause permanent damage to the body, leaving riders bow-legged and suffering from chronic back pain. And if your horse spooks, which happens frequently at snakes, sudden noises, or unfamiliar objects, you can easily be thrown. A fall from a galloping horse can result in broken bones, head injuries, or death. And remember, you are miles from any help. A serious injury out here is essentially a death sentence. If you cannot afford a horse, you might travel by wagon. But forget the romantic image of pioneers, cheerfully rolling across pristine prairies, singing songs, and enjoying the journey. That image is pure Hollywood fantasy. The reality of wagon travel is brutally, relentlessly uncomfortable. The vehicles have no suspension system beyond the slight give in wooden wheels. This means you feel every rock, every rut, every hole in the trail. The constant jarring causes what people call wagon sickness, similar to seasickness, leaving travelers nauseous, dizzy, and miserable. Hours of this punishment leave you bruised, your body feeling like it has been beaten out. Roads, if they exist at all, are typically just dirt tracks carved by previous travelers. After rain, they become muddy quagmires where wagons can sink axle deep, trapping you for hours or even days while you try to extract your vehicle. The mud clings to everything, adding hundreds of pounds of weight to the wagon, exhausting the animals pulling it. During dry periods, the dust is so thick you can barely breathe or see. It gets into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, coating everything with a fine, gritty powder. You taste it with every breath, feel it grinding between your teeth, and there is no escape from it. Wagons frequently break down. Wheels crack under the strain. Axles snap miles from the nearest settlement. When this happens, you have to make repairs yourself, using whatever materials and tools you have on hand. Or abandon the wagon and continue on foot, leaving behind most of your possessions. Now, let's say you've decided to undertake something truly ambitious. You've joined a wagon train heading west on the famous Oregon Trail. This 2,000-mile journey from Missouri to Oregon, or California, is one of the most perilous undertakings of the 19th century. And you're about to discover why. Of the approximately 400,000 people who attempted this journey between the 1840s and 1860s, an estimated 1 in 10 did not survive. Think about that statistic for a moment. 1 in 10. If you're traveling with 9 other people, one of you will likely die before reaching your destination. The Oregon Trail has been called the nation's longest graveyard, and the description is chillingly accurate. Some historians estimate that an average of 10 to 15 people died for every mile of the trail. Think about that. A grave every 350 feet or so for 2,000 miles. The trail is lined with makeshift crosses and stone markers, many without names, as families are forced to bury their loved ones and continue their journey immediately. There is no time for extended mourning on the trail. Each day's delay means less chance of crossing the mountains. Before winter snows make the passes impassable. The primary killer on the Oregon Trail is not what you might expect. It's not Indian attacks, not wild animals, not even accidents, though all of these claim their share of lives. The number one killer is disease, and nothing spreads disease quite like cholera. Cholera is a bacterial infection spread through contaminated water. It is one of the most horrifying illnesses imaginable. The symptoms begin innocently enough: mild stomach discomfort, a bit of nausea. But within hours, the disease reveals its true horror. Severe diarrhea and vomiting drain the body of fluid so quickly that a person can be healthy at breakfast and dead by dinner. The dehydration is extreme, turning the skin blue-gray, sinking the eyes deep into the skull, leaving the victim looking like a corpse even before death arrives. And there is no effective treatment available. Nothing you can do but watch as the person wastes away before your eyes. Wagon trains sometimes lose dozens of people in a single cholera outbreak. The disease moves through the group like wildfire, and there is no way to stop it. You drink from the same water sources that previous wagon trains used, sources that might be contaminated with the waste of cholera victims who passed through weeks earlier. You have no way of knowing if the water is safe, no way to purify it effectively. Other diseases claim their share of victims as well. Dysentery causes severe diarrhea and dehydration, similar to cholera but usually slower. Typhoid fever brings high temperatures, severe headaches, and delirium. Mountain fever, likely various tick-borne illnesses, causes debilitating symptoms that can last for weeks. Children are especially vulnerable. Their developing immune systems cannot fight off these diseases as effectively as adults. Many families lose multiple children during the journey, burying small bodies along the trail, and then having to move on, grief raw and unprocessed. Because stopping means risking death for everyone. Medical care on the trail is rudimentary at best, often consisting of folk remedies that do little to help and sometimes make conditions worse. Bleeding, purging, toxic compounds of mercury or arsenic. These are the treatments available, and they often finish off patients who might have survived with simple rest and hydration. If disease doesn't kill you, the river crossings might. This is another aspect of the Oregon Trail that Hollywood almost never portrays accurately. Wagons are not designed to float. They're heavy wooden structures loaded with all your worldly possessions. But pioneers have to cross numerous rivers on their journey west, and many of these rivers are deep, wide, and dangerously fast. Some crossings have ferries or established fords, shallow areas where wagons can be driven across. But many require the wagon to be converted into a makeshift boat with canvas or hides stretched underneath to create a waterproof seal. The process is nerve-wracking and frequently ends in disaster. Wagons capsize in these crossings with alarming regularity. The current catches the heavy vehicle, tips it over, and suddenly people and possessions are being swept downstream. Drowning claims hundreds of lives during the migration period. The Platte River, the Columbia River, the Snake River, all have claimed their share of victims, their waters hiding bones that will never be recovered, even when the wagon makes it across. The draft animals often don't. Oxen and horses panic in the water, their heavy bodies dragged under by the current. Losing your animals means losing your ability to continue the journey. You're stranded, forced to abandon most of your possessions and continue on foot, or wait and hope that another wagon train will take pity on you. The livestock losses aren't just about transportation. These animals represent a massive investment, often everything a family owns. Losing them means arriving at your destination destitute, with no way to start farming or establish yourself in your new home. Contrary to popular belief, attacks by Native Americans are relatively rare on the Oregon Trail. This might surprise you, given how Hollywood has portrayed the journey, with wagon trains under constant siege, circling wagons for protection every night. But the reality is quite different. Most tribes the migrants encounter are actually helpful. They offer supplies, guidance, and assistance with river crossings. They trade with the wagon trains, exchanging fresh food, information about the trail ahead, and knowledge about water sources for manufactured goods, cloth, and other items. This doesn't mean there's no conflict. But when violence occurs, it's often the result of provocations by migrants, stolen resources, or misunderstandings. The systematic displacement of indigenous peoples has created an understandable hostility in some groups. But most choose to accommodate the endless stream of migrants rather than fight what they recognize as an overwhelming force. The majority of violent deaths on the trail come from accidents. People are crushed by wagon wheels when they slip while walking alongside. They drown in river crossings. They're kicked or trampled by livestock. Firearms accidents are shockingly common, as most travelers are inexperienced with weapons, but carry them for hunting and protection. Accidental shootings happen with disturbing frequency. Someone's rifle goes off while being loaded or unloaded. A child finds a gun and doesn't understand how to handle it safely. Men cleaning their weapons accidentally discharge them, sometimes killing themselves, sometimes hitting others nearby. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the Oregon Trail journey is the psychological toll it takes on travelers. You bury children, parents, spouses along the way, and have to continue traveling immediately. There is no time for grief, no opportunity to process the loss. You dig a grave, say a brief prayer if you're religious, mark it with whatever you can find, and then you move on because the wagon train won't wait. The constant stress, the unrelenting physical hardship, the grief you're not allowed to feel, all of this weighs on the mind. Many travelers suffer mental breakdowns during the journey. Depression becomes so severe that some simply give up, lying down in the wagon and refusing to continue. Suicide is not uncommon among trail migrants. The combination of hopelessness, exhaustion, grief, and the endless nature of the journey becomes too much for some to bear. Men and women simply walk away from camp one day and are never seen again. Or they're found hanging from a tree. Or they put a gun to their head when they think no one is watching. The trail journals and diaries that have survived paint a picture of profound suffering, both physical and mental. These are not adventure stories. They're accounts of human beings pushed to their absolute limits, and sometimes beyond. If you somehow survive the journey to California or Oregon, your challenges are far from over. Many people arrive at their destination having spent all their money and resources on the journey itself. You might arrive destitute, malnourished, ill, and traumatized, only to find that the promised land has its own harsh realities. The free land you've been promised might be in areas with poor soil, inadequate water, or extreme weather conditions. The gold or other opportunities you've heard about might already be claimed by earlier arrivals. You might find yourself with nothing, in a place where you know no one, far from any support system. Some families arrive so broken by the journey that they cannot continue. They lack the resources to establish themselves, lack the physical strength to build and farm, lack the mental resilience to start over yet again. These people become the forgotten casualties of westward expansion, the ones who made it to the destination, but couldn't survive what came after. But let's say you're not traveling that far. Perhaps you're just heading to a nearby town or settlement, a journey of only a few days. Even these short journeys in the Wild West present significant dangers that modern people would find hard to comprehend. Travelers might encounter outlaws who see lone riders or small groups as easy targets. While the frequency of stagecoach robberies has been exaggerated in later fiction, they do occur regularly enough to be a legitimate concern. Road agents, as they're called, are desperate men willing to kill for whatever money or valuables you might be carrying. The natural environment poses constant threats. Flash floods can wash out trails or trap unwary travelers. You're riding along a dry creek bed, the sky clear above, when suddenly a wall of water appears from upstream, the result of a storm miles away. You have seconds to get to higher ground or be swept away. Summer heat and desert regions can kill through dehydration and heat stroke. You think you have enough water for the journey, but your calculations are wrong, or you lose your water supply to a broken container, or the heat is more intense than you expected. Your body begins to shut down, your thinking becomes confused, and you make poor decisions that worsen your situation. Winter blizzards routinely trap travelers, sometimes leading to freezing deaths or desperate situations that require extreme measures to survive. The Donner Party is the most famous example of this, trapped by early snows in the Sierra Nevada mountains, eventually resorting to cannibalism to stay alive. But there are countless other stories of travelers who froze to death within sight of shelter, or who lost fingers and toes to frostbite, or who barely survived by huddling together for warmth in makeshift shelters. Navigation itself is challenging in an era before detailed maps. You rely on vague directions, landmarks that can change or be misidentified, and the experience of guides who sometimes prove unreliable or simply wrong. Follow the river until you see a distinctive rock formation, then head west for 2 days. But what if there are multiple rock formations that could be described the same way? What if your sense of direction is off? What if the person who gave you directions was mistaken? Getting lost in the wilderness can be a death sentence, especially if your supplies run low. You wander in circles, growing more desperate, your food and water dwindling. You see landmarks, but can't determine what they mean, can't figure out which direction leads to safety. Panic sets in, which leads to poor decisions, which leads to greater danger. As you travel today, you notice another aspect of frontier life that movies rarely depict accurately: the stunning diversity of people. The Wild West is not populated solely by white cowboys and settlers. It is a meeting ground of cultures from around the world, a genuinely multicultural place. Though that diversity exists within structures of inequality and prejudice, Chinese immigrants work as railroad builders, miners, and merchants. You see them in work gangs, their distinctive clothing and cues marking them as foreign in the eyes of many settlers. They've come seeking opportunity, believing the promises of wealth and freedom in America. But they face brutal discrimination and often dangerous, exploitative working conditions. Mexican families have been living in the Southwest long before it became United States territory. This was their land before the Mexican-American War, their communities established for generations. Now they find themselves in a new country, subject to laws they had no voice in creating, often facing discrimination and land theft despite treaty protections. Black cowboys make up as much as 25% of the workforce on some ranches. These are men, many of them former slaves, who have come west hoping to build new lives in a place where, perhaps, their skin color might matter less than their skills and work ethic. They find that frontier racism is different from Southern racism in form, but just as entrenched and limiting. European immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Italy, and Scandinavia bring their cultures and traditions. You hear different languages spoken in the streets, see different styles of dress, encounter different approaches to farming, cooking, and community building. This diversity enriches frontier life in many ways. But it also creates tensions as groups compete for resources and opportunity. And of course, dozens of distinct Native American nations have called these lands home for thousands of years before others arrived. Their relationship with the frontier is fundamentally different from all other groups. They are not immigrants or settlers. They are the original inhabitants, watching as their world is transformed, their resources depleted, their people displaced or destroyed. This diversity, however, does not mean equality or harmony. Racial violence is a common feature of frontier life, sometimes organized, sometimes spontaneous, but always reflecting deep prejudices and power imbalances. Chinese railroad workers face brutal discrimination. They are often forced to take the most dangerous jobs, handling explosives to blast through mountain passes, working in conditions where cave-ins and explosions are common. They receive lower pay than white workers for the same work, and they're excluded from the better positions and opportunities. In many mining camps and towns, Chinese residents face organized violence. Riots break out, Chinese businesses are burned, people are beaten or killed. In 1885, in Rock Springs, Wyoming, white miners attacked Chinese workers, killing 28 people and driving hundreds more from the town. This is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of violence that occurs throughout the West. Mexican landowners frequently see their property seized through legal manipulation or outright theft after the Mexican-American War. Despite treaty guarantees protecting their rights, they find themselves facing American courts that don't recognize their documentation, or land speculators who use violence and intimidation to force them off their property. Spanish-derived water rights systems that have functioned effectively for generations are replaced with English common law approaches that favor newer settlers over established communities. Irrigation systems that served entire communities are dismantled or taken over, disrupting agriculture and ways of life. Black Americans who move west hoping to escape Southern discrimination often find frontier racism just as entrenched, if different in form. Despite their crucial contributions to ranching, mining, and building frontier communities, they're frequently excluded from economic opportunities and social acceptance. Black cowboys work the same dangerous jobs as white cowboys, face the same threats from weather and wildlife, demonstrate the same skills with livestock and horses. But they're paid less, given fewer opportunities for advancement, and face discrimination in towns where their work takes them. Black homesteaders establish communities in several Western territories, building farms and towns through the same backbreaking labor as white settlers. But they frequently face organized resistance from white neighbors, discriminatory application of homestead laws, and violence designed to drive them away. For Native Americans, the expansion of white settlement is nothing short of catastrophic. It's not merely about losing land, though that alone is devastating. It's about the collapse of entire ways of life, the destruction of economic systems, the disruption of spiritual practices tied to specific landscapes, and the decimation of populations through disease, warfare, and deliberate policy. The indigenous population of North America, once numbering perhaps 15 million people, has been reduced to fewer than 300,000 by 1900. This population collapse is due to multiple factors working together in a deadly combination. Disease is the greatest killer. European diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, cholera, to which Native Americans have no immunity, sweep through communities with horrifying results. Entire villages are wiped out. In some nations, 90% or more of the population dies within a few generations of first contact with Europeans. Warfare takes an enormous toll as well. As settlement expands, conflicts erupt over land, resources, and broken treaties. These conflicts are overwhelmingly one-sided. Native groups, even when they achieve tactical victories, cannot match the resources, numbers, and industrial capacity of the United States military. The deliberate destruction of food sources, particularly the buffalo, is used as a weapon of war. Buffalo herds that once numbered in the tens of millions are hunted nearly to extinction, not primarily for food or hides, though those are factors, but as deliberate policy to force Plains tribes onto reservations by eliminating their primary resource. General Philip Sheridan, a key military leader in the Plains Indian Wars, reportedly endorses this approach, viewing the destruction of the buffalo as the key to breaking indigenous resistance. Whether or not the specific quotes attributed to him are accurate, they reflect actual government policy of the era. United States government policies systematically push Native Americans from their traditional lands onto reservations, often in areas with poor soil and few resources. The reservation system is designed not to preserve native cultures, but to contain and control indigenous populations while opening their former lands to white settlement. Treaties are regularly broken when valuable resources are discovered on reservation lands. Gold in the Black Hills leads to the violation of treaties with the Lakota. Oil discoveries lead to renegotiation of boundaries. Anytime there's profit to be made, treaty obligations seem to evaporate. Native children are taken from their families and placed in boarding schools designed to erase their cultural identity. The philosophy behind these schools is explicitly stated by their founders. Kill the Indian. Save the man. Children have their hair cut short, are forbidden from speaking their languages, practicing their religions, or maintaining their cultural identities. They're punished, sometimes brutally, for any expression of their heritage. The intergenerational trauma from these policies continues to affect Native communities today. Languages are lost, cultural practices forgotten, families torn apart in ways that ripple through generations. The romanticized cowboys versus Indians' narratives of later films grossly misrepresent the complex interactions between settlers and indigenous peoples. These weren't simply conflicts between civilization and savagery, as they're often portrayed, but complicated struggles involving broken treaties, resource competition, cultural misunderstandings, and deliberate policies of displacement and cultural destruction. Many native nations initially tried to accommodate newcomers, to find ways to coexist. They trade, they guide, they share knowledge about the land and its resources. They enter into treaties, believing the agreements will be honored. But they find that settlers keep coming, that promises are broken, that each accommodation leads only to new demands. Violence typically erupts after repeated treaty violations, encroachment on tribal lands, or deliberate provocations. Even then, many native leaders work to avoid warfare, understanding the overwhelming odds they face. But eventually, some groups decide that resistance, however futile it might ultimately prove, is preferable to slow extinction through displacement and assimilation. As you continue your journey, you contemplate another group whose experience differs markedly from Hollywood depictions. Women on the frontier, far from the helpless damsels or prim schoolmarms of Western movies. Frontier women perform incredibly demanding physical labor while navigating restrictive social expectations. On homesteads and farms, women don't just handle traditional domestic duties. Yes, they cook, clean, care for children, and make clothing, all of which are far more labor-intensive than in modern times. But they also work in the fields, tend livestock, and defend the home when necessary. A frontier woman's workday typically starts before dawn and ends well after dark, with few, if any, days of rest. She might need to plow fields in the morning, using a heavy wooden plow behind a stubborn ox. She might deliver a neighbor's baby at midday, having learned midwifery from necessity rather than formal training. She might fight off predators threatening the livestock in the afternoon, using whatever weapons are available. And she still has to prepare meals, care for her own children, maintain the home, and perform countless other tasks throughout. The physical demands are extraordinary. Many women suffer permanent damage to their bodies from the relentless labor. Their hands become rough and calloused, their backs bent from years of stooping and lifting, their bodies worn out from repeated pregnancies and childbirths. Combined with inadequate nutrition and no rest, many women become widows young due to the dangerous nature of frontier life. When this happens, they often have to manage farms or businesses alone while raising children. There's no safety net, no support system beyond what the community might provide. A widow must do the work of two adults or risk losing everything. Despite their essential contributions, women have few legal rights. In most territories and states, they cannot vote, cannot own property independently if married, cannot have custody of their children in the event of divorce. They're considered dependents, legally under the control of their husbands or fathers. Domestic violence is considered a private matter with little legal recourse available to victims. The law recognizes a husband's right to discipline his wife. Unless the violence is extreme and public, there's little a woman can do to escape an abusive situation. Divorce is difficult to obtain, socially stigmatizing, and leaves a woman in a precarious economic position. For unmarried women, options are severely limited. Teaching is one of the few respectable professions, though female teachers are paid significantly less than their male counterparts, often half the salary or less for identical work. And they're expected to resign upon marriage, as a married woman is assumed to have a husband to support her and therefore doesn't need employment. Some women find economic independence through running boarding houses, where they provide meals and lodging to miners, cowboys, or other itinerant workers. It's hard work, cooking for many people, maintaining rooms, managing finances. But it offers a measure of independence that few other occupations provide. Others work as nurses. Though medical care in this era is primitive, and nursing is seen as an extension of women's natural, caregiving role rather than a skilled profession. Some establish millinery or dressmaking businesses, using sewing skills to serve communities that need clothing and have limited access to manufactured goods. Then there are the soiled doves, prostitutes who work in frontier brothels and saloons. While later mythology has sometimes romanticized these women, portraying them as liberated or adventurous, the reality is typically grim and exploitative. Many enter the profession out of economic desperation. A widow with no other means of support, a woman abandoned by her husband, a young girl with no family and no other options. They turn to prostitution because the alternatives are starvation or complete destitution. The work is dangerous. Physical abuse from customers is common. Disease, particularly venereal diseases for which there is no effective treatment, spreads rapidly. Addiction to alcohol or opiates, often starting as a way to numb the psychological pain of the work, destroys lives. The mortality rate among prostitutes is high. Their lives often short and brutal. Even those who manage to earn substantial money find themselves socially ostracized and unable to transition to more respectable positions. Once a woman has been labeled a prostitute, that stigma follows her for life. She cannot easily marry, cannot enter polite society, cannot build a conventional life. Some madams, women who run brothels, do achieve a measure of wealth and independence. They're businesswomen, managing employees and finances, navigating relationships with law enforcement and community leaders. But they too face social exclusion and the constant threat of violence or legal action. Some women do find greater freedom on the frontier than they might have back east. The shortage of women in Western territories gives them more marriage options and sometimes better treatment, as communities compete to attract and keep female residents. A woman on the frontier might have multiple marriage proposals, giving her the opportunity to choose based on compatibility, resources, or other factors rather than simply accepting the first offer. Some use this leverage to negotiate better terms in their marriages, to maintain more control over their lives and decisions. A few territories, like Wyoming and Utah, grant women voting rights decades before the 19th Amendment, recognizing their essential contributions to frontier development. In Wyoming, women gained the right to vote in 1869, a full 50 years before the constitutional amendment date. This isn't necessarily because frontier men are more progressive in their views about gender. It's partly strategic, a way to attract more women to territories that desperately need them, and partly a recognition that frontier conditions require everyone's participation, and that women are already performing work that challenges conventional gender roles. As the day wears on and you continue traveling, a physical toll of frontier movement becomes increasingly apparent. Your muscles ache from hours in the saddle or walking. Your skin is burned from the sun, which beats down relentlessly with no sunscreen, no protective clothing beyond what you're already wearing. Your lips are cracked, your throat dry despite the water you've been carefully rationing. You see other travelers along the way. A family in a wagon, their faces drawn with exhaustion. A lone cowboy, his horse limping slightly, probably due for rest that the rider can't afford to give. A group of miners heading to a new strike, their eyes bright with hope that will likely be disappointed. Each of these people has a story, dreams that brought them west, hardships they've endured, losses they've suffered. But you don't hear these stories. Everyone is too tired, too focused on their own survival, to engage in much conversation. You exchange brief greetings, perhaps share information about trail conditions ahead, and move on. The landscape rolls past, beautiful in its harshness. The frontier has a raw majesty that's undeniable. But you're learning that beauty doesn't equal safety, that stunning vistas can hide deadly dangers, that this land gives nothing freely and takes everything it can as evening approaches. You search for a place to make camp or a town where you might find shelter. The sun drops toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and you're struck by how different this experience is from anything you've known. There's no GPS to guide you, no cell phone to call for help if you run into trouble, no weather app to warn you of approaching storms. You're alone with your skills, your judgment, and your luck, and you can only hope that will be enough to see you through another day. The frontier is teaching you humility, showing you how small and vulnerable you are in the face of nature's vastness and indifference. And tomorrow, the lessons will continue, each one harder than the last. The morning light filters through the cracks in your cabin walls once again, waking you from another restless sleep. Your body protests as you rise, muscles stiff and aching from the previous day's labor and travel. But there's no time to linger. Out here, survival depends on work, relentless and unforgiving work that consumes every waking hour and leaves you too exhausted to dream. Today, you must decide how you'll make your living on the frontier. Perhaps you'll try your luck in the mines, chasing the promise of wealth that draws thousands west. Maybe you'll attempt ranching, working with livestock on the open range, or farming, wrestling crops from unforgiving soil. Or perhaps you'll simply hire yourself out as a laborer, trading your body's strength for whatever wages you can earn. Whatever you choose, understand this: there are no easy occupations on the frontier. Every path is fraught with danger, hardship, and the very real possibility of failure. The romanticized vision of striking it rich or building a prosperous ranch bears little resemblance to the grinding reality that awaits. Let's say you decide to try your hand at mining. You've heard the stories, read the newspaper accounts, listened to the tales told in saloons. The California gold rush, the Nevada silver strikes, the Colorado mining booms. Ordinary men finding nuggets the size of chicken eggs, becoming wealthy overnight, transforming from paupers to princes with a single lucky strike. What these stories conveniently omit are the brutal realities awaiting those who chase mineral dreams. For every man who strikes it rich, thousands find only poverty, injury, or death. The mining districts of the West are littered with broken dreams and broken bodies. First, you need to stake a claim, which means finding unclaimed land with potential mineral deposits. By the 1870s, this is increasingly difficult. The easiest and richest areas were claimed years earlier, during the initial rushes. What remains requires more work for less reward. You might spend weeks searching for a promising location, only to discover that someone else has already filed on it, or that the land is held by a large mining corporation that has no intention of sharing. If you're lucky enough to find an unclaimed spot, you must register your claim at the nearest government office and pay the required fees. These fees might be substantial, eating into whatever savings you've managed to accumulate. Then the real work begins, and it is some of the most physically demanding labor imaginable. For placer mining, searching for loose gold in streams and gravel deposits, you spend hours bent over in ice-cold mountain water. Your back aches constantly from the hunched position. Your hands crack and bleed from exposure to water and rough materials. You sift through sediment with a pan or sluice box, watching the water wash away dirt and rocks, while hoping that glittering flakes of gold will remain. After hours of backbreaking work, you might find a few tiny flakes worth pennies. Maybe, if you're fortunate, a small nugget worth a few dollars. But more often, you find nothing at all. Day after day, You wade into freezing water, bend over your pan, and come away with hands too numb to feel and nothing to show for your effort. If you venture into hard rock mining, digging for veins of ore deep underground, the dangers multiply exponentially. You're not just fighting nature anymore. You're entering its dark heart, descending into shafts and tunnels where the earth itself seems determined to kill you, tunneling into unstable rock without modern safety equipment or engineering knowledge leads to frequent cave-ins. You hear about them constantly. Miners crushed where they stood, buried under tons of rock with no hope of rescue. Sometimes the trapped miners die instantly, their bodies pulverized. Other times you hear them calling from beneath the rubble, their voices growing weaker over hours or days as air runs out and hope dies with them. Asterisk. The shafts are poorly ventilated, if ventilated at all. Toxic gases accumulate in the depths. Carbon monoxide, odorless and invisible, suffocating miners who have no warning of the danger. You've seen men simply collapse, their candles guttering out as they fall, dead before they hit the ground. Others survive, but with damaged lungs and brains, never quite right again. Blasting with black powder or dynamite to break through rock is incredibly hazardous. The explosives are unstable, sensitive to heat, shock, and moisture. Miners frequently lose fingers, hands, eyes, or lives when charges detonate prematurely. Even when the blasting goes as planned, thrown rock fragments become deadly projectiles in the confined space of a tunnel. The thunderous noise of explosions, repeated day after day, leaves many miners with permanent hearing loss. You see them communicating through hand signals and lip reading, their ears so damaged that normal conversation is impossible. The constant percussion affects more than hearing. Your head aches, your teeth feel loose in your skull, your entire body vibrates with each blast. Even if you avoid immediate catastrophe, the long-term health effects are devastating. You constantly inhale fine rock dust, which accumulates in your lungs. Silicosis, they call it, though miners have cruder names. Miners' consumption, the stone cough, the slow death. Your lungs gradually fill with scarring, making each breath more difficult until you're drowning in air, suffocating slowly over months or years. If you work in gold processing, you're exposed to mercury used to separate gold from ore. The mercury causes neurological damage, tremors, mental confusion, personality changes. Some miners go mad from mercury poisoning, their minds deteriorating until they're barely human. Those working in copper or lead mines face similar poisoning from the metals they extract. The mining industry of the 1870s has virtually no safety regulations or oversight. Mine owners prioritize profit over worker welfare, and injuries are considered an expected part of the job. When someone is hurt, they're typically dragged out of the mine and left to recover or die on their own. Medical care is minimal and often ineffective. A serious injury means the end of your career and livelihood, with no disability support or workers' compensation available. For all these risks and hardships, what's the likely reward? Despite the mythology of the lucky prospector, the vast majority of miners barely earn subsistence wages. By the 1870s, most work for large mining companies rather than operating independently. You might earn $2 to $3 for a grueling 10 to 12-hour day underground. Studies suggest that storekeepers, saloon owners, and prostitutes consistently make more money than the miners whose dreams sustain frontier mining towns. The people selling supplies, liquor, and companionship to miners profit far more reliably than those actually digging for gold or silver. The mining towns themselves are notoriously rough places. Imagine a community composed primarily of young, single men engaged in dangerous work, with few women, families, or civilizing institutions. The social dynamics are volatile, sometimes explosive. Alcohol consumption is astronomical. The average mining camp resident drinks several times more than the typical American of any era. Men drink to numb the pain of injuries, to forget the friends they've lost, to escape the fear that follows them from the mines, to find temporary oblivion from the grinding hopelessness of their lives. Violence is commonplace. Fights erupt over trivial matters: a perceived insult, a disputed card game, a woman's attention. Stabbings and shootings occur with disturbing regularity. The saloons and gambling halls that dominate mining towns are frequently sites of deadly confrontations. Not because of formal duels, but because of drunken arguments that escalate quickly when everyone is armed. Sanitation in mining camps is typically abysmal. These communities spring up rapidly with minimal planning or infrastructure. Human waste and garbage accumulate in streets and waterways. During warm months, the stench is overwhelming, and swarms of flies spread disease from waste to food. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery spread rapidly in these conditions, sometimes killing more miners than cave-ins or explosions. The mud during rainy seasons is legendary, sometimes knee-deep in heavily trafficked areas, mixed with animal manure, human waste, and mining runoff. The dust during dry periods chokes you, infiltrating every building, coating every surface, getting into your food and water. If you do manage to find valuable ore, you face the challenge of converting it to cash. Banking in the Wild West is primitive and often predatory. Many mining towns have no banks at all, forcing miners to carry gold dust or ore, making them targets for theft. Rogue agents watch for miners heading to assay offices or larger towns to sell their finds. Some saloons and general stores offer to buy gold, but frequently at rates far below actual value. They take advantage of miners' limited options, their need for immediate cash, and their lack of knowledge about current market prices. A miner who's worked for months might receive a fraction of what his gold is actually worth. Where banks do exist, they operate with minimal regulation or oversight. Bank failures are common, often wiping out customers' life savings without warning or recourse. Many bankers are little more than confidence men who establish storefronts, collect deposits, and disappear overnight with all the funds, without federally backed currency. Paper money is issued by individual banks, and its value fluctuates wildly depending on the bank's reputation. Counterfeit bills circulate widely, and even experienced merchants can be fooled by well-made fakes. The safest form of money is gold or silver coin, but carrying it makes you a target for robbery. Perhaps after considering the dangers and disappointments of mining, you decide to try ranching instead. The cattle industry is booming in the 1870s, with demand for beef in eastern cities creating opportunities on the frontier. Surely this is a healthier, more profitable venture than descending into dark, poisonous mines. Ranching does avoid some of the worst health hazards of mining, but it introduces its own unique dangers and hardships. The romantic image of the cowboy, popularized in later decades, bears little resemblance to the reality of working with livestock on the frontier. Starting a ranch requires significant capital. Land, even in remote areas, costs money to claim and develop. Livestock represents a major investment. Cattle, horses, breeding stock all require substantial funds. Equipment, buildings, fencing, wells, everything needs to be purchased or built. Many aspiring ranchers go deeply into debt to acquire these necessities, betting their future on favorable weather and market conditions. Nature, however, rarely cooperates. Droughts can wither grazing lands and dry up crucial water sources, forcing ranchers to either watch their cattle starve or sell at devastating losses. You might spend years building a herd, only to see it die during a single drought season, the carcasses littering your land like monuments to failed dreams. Harsh winters are equally devastating. The infamous Great Die-Up of 1886 to 1887 kills up to 90% of cattle on northern ranges during unusually severe weather. Ranchers who seemed prosperous in autumn are bankrupt by spring, their herds frozen or starved, their investments lost, their futures destroyed. Disease can sweep through herds, wiping out a rancher's investment overnight. Texas fever, anthrax, and other infectious diseases have no effective treatments in the 1870s. You might watch helplessly as your cattle sicken and die, knowing that each death represents dollars you'll never recover. Predators take a constant toll on livestock, particularly vulnerable calves. Wolves, cougars, and bears kill animals worth significant money. You spend time and ammunition hunting predators, but they're cunning and persistent. Poisonous plants, quicksand, cliffs, and injuries further reduce your herd. The iconic cattle drives, moving herds hundreds of miles to railroad shipping points, are not romantic adventures, but grueling, dangerous undertakings. Cowboys not the glamorous figures of later films, but typically young. Poorly paid laborers work 18 to 20-hour days during drives, catching brief sleep in the saddle or on the ground. These drives face constant threats. River crossings can turn deadly in minutes if animals panic. 1,000 cattle, each weighing over 1,000 pounds, can create a stampede that drowns cowboys and livestock alike. The animals pile up in the water, those behind crushing those in front, turning the river red with blood. Stampedes are the nightmare that haunts every trail drive. They can be triggered by something as simple as a lightning strike, a snapping twig, or an unexpected sound. Suddenly, thousands of animals are thundering through the darkness, an unstoppable force of hooves and horns and blind panic. Cowboys ride into this chaos, trying to turn the herd to regain control, knowing that one misstep means being trampled to death. The cowboy's life is far from the freedom portrayed in later mythology. They typically earn about $30 per month for exhausting, dangerous work. Most are very young, often teenagers from poor backgrounds with few other options. A significant percentage are Black, Mexican, or mixed-race individuals facing discrimination that limits their opportunities elsewhere. Their diet on the trail consists mainly of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, monotonous, nutritionally deficient meals that leave them chronically malnourished. Fresh food is a rare luxury. Coffee, if available, is boiled until it's thick and bitter. More about caffeine than flavor. Medical care is limited to whatever the trail cook might know about folk remedies. Injuries, common in such dangerous work, often go untreated until they become life-threatening. A broken bone might never heal properly. An infected wound can lead to amputation or death. Many cowboys die young from injuries, exposure, disease, or violence. The work destroys bodies. Years in the saddle leave men bow-legged with chronic back problems and damaged joints. The sun ages skin prematurely. Poor diet and hard living leave cowboys gaunt and worn, looking decades older than their actual years. Perhaps neither mining nor ranching appeals to you. What about farming? Surely growing food, the most fundamental of human activities, offers a more stable and less dangerous way of life on the frontier. The Homestead Act of 1862 has opened vast areas of the West to settlement, offering 160 acres free to anyone who will live on and improve the land for 5 years. This seems like an incredible opportunity, a chance for people with little money to become landowners and build independent livelihoods. The reality proves far more challenging than the promise. First, 160 acres might sound substantial, but in the arid regions that comprise much of the available land, it's often insufficient to support a family. Rainfall is a fraction of what exists in the East, and traditional farming methods fail spectacularly in these dry environments. Many settlers have no knowledge of the dry farming techniques needed for success. They try to farm as they did back east, planting crops that require abundant water in land that receives barely 10 inches of rain annually. They watch their crops wither and die year after year until their resources are exhausted, and they must abandon their claims. Starting a frontier farm requires tremendous physical labor. The first task is building shelter. On the treeless plains, this typically means a sod house, a dugout, or structure constructed by cutting and stacking dense prairie turf. These soddies are dark, damp dwellings that leak when it rains, harbor insects and snakes, and crumble without constant maintenance. Then comes the backbreaking work of breaking the land for planting. Prairie sod, held together by dense grass roots developed over centuries, is extraordinarily difficult to plow. It can take a year or more just to prepare a few acres for planting. The work is so physically demanding that it permanently damages many farmers' bodies, leaving them bent and broken before they reach middle age. Once crops are planted, farmers face threats from every direction. Drought can wither plants before harvest, turning months of work to dust. Torrential rains can wash away seedlings or flood fields. Early frost can kill crops just before harvest, destroying an entire season's effort in a single night. Grasshoppers descend in biblical swarms, consuming everything green in their path. You stand helpless as millions of insects devour your crops in hours, sometimes even eating the wooden handles of tools left in fields. The swarms are so dense they block out the sun, and their bodies crunch underfoot wherever you walk. Hail can destroy an entire crop in minutes, shredding plants and battering the soil. Wind can strip topsoil from fields, carrying away fertility accumulated over millennia. Fire, whether from lightning or human carelessness, can race across dry grasslands faster than a horse can run, consuming everything in its path. Disease affects frontier farmers as it does everyone else, but with particularly devastating consequences. With no hired help and little community support, a family's illness during crucial planting or harvesting periods can mean the difference between survival and starvation. Women often continue working the fields while heavily pregnant or just days after giving birth, risking their health because the work simply cannot wait. Farm accidents are common and often fatal. Homemade tools break and cause injuries. Animals panic and trample their handlers. Men fall from roofs or under wagon wheels. Fingers, hands, and limbs are crushed or severed by primitive equipment with no safety features. Even successful harvests can turn deadly. Farmers have died when they fell into grain storage bins and suffocated in the loose grain. Others are killed when poorly constructed storage buildings collapse under the weight of their contents. The isolation of frontier farms takes a heavy psychological toll. Neighbors might be miles away, visited only occasionally. Women in particular suffer from this isolation, sometimes going months without speaking to anyone outside their immediate family. Depression, anxiety, and what contemporary accounts call prairie madness affect many settlers. The vast, empty landscape, the endless wind, the lack of human contact all contribute to psychological breakdowns. Some affected individuals become violent toward family members. Others commit suicide, unable to endure the loneliness and hardship any longer. Some simply abandon their homesteads and return east, defeated by the psychological pressure of frontier life. For those who persevere through these challenges and actually produce crops, economic obstacles remain. Transportation to markets is difficult and expensive. Without refrigeration, perishable products must be sold quickly or preserved through methods that reduce their value. Large agricultural corporations and railroad companies use their influence to keep crop prices low and transportation costs high, squeezing independent farmers from both directions. Many farmers discover that they're working not for themselves, but for the banks and merchants who hold their debts. A bad season means falling further behind on payments. A good season might only allow them to break even. True prosperity remains forever just beyond reach. A dream that sustains them through hardship, but rarely materializes. Perhaps, after considering the risks of mining, ranching, or farming. You decide that working for wages offers a safer, more stable path. You'll hire yourself out to whoever needs labor, trading your physical strength for whatever pay you can get. Wage labor does avoid some of the worst financial risks of independent enterprises, but it introduces its own hardships and dangers. Industrial safety standards are virtually non-existent. Workers in frontier factories, mills, and workshops suffer horrific injuries from unguarded machinery. Saws, presses, and other equipment operate without protective equipment or safety features of any kind. Construction workers build increasingly tall structures without harnesses or safety equipment. Falls are common, often fatal. You might be carrying lumber up a ladder when you slip, plummeting to the ground below, or working on a roof when the boards give way beneath you. There's no compensation for injuries, no insurance to support your family if you die. You simply disappear from the work roster, replaced by the next desperate man seeking employment. Railroad work is particularly dangerous. Track layers work with minimal equipment under brutal conditions, suffering high rates of injury and death. You swing a heavy hammer hour after hour, driving spikes into ties, your muscles screaming, your hands blistered despite calluses. The heat is intense during summer, sometimes causing men to collapse from heat stroke. The cold is brutal during winter, leaving fingers and toes frostbitten or frozen. Chinese workers, who build much of the transcontinental railroad, are often assigned the most dangerous tasks. They handle unstable explosives to blast through mountain passes, working in conditions where cave-ins and explosions are constant threats. They receive lower pay than white workers for identical labor and face brutal discrimination from both employers and fellow workers. Working hours are long by any standard, typically 10 to 12 hours per day, 6 days per week. Sunday might offer rest, or it might not, depending on your employer and the urgency of the work. There are no overtime laws, no mandated breaks, no legal protections of any kind. Pay is low, with most workers barely earning subsistence wages. You might make $1 or $2 per day if you're fortunate. From this, you must pay for food, lodging, and any other necessities. Saving money is nearly impossible when you're already spending everything just to survive. Child labor is common, with children as young as 8 or 9 working alongside adults in many industries. They suffer higher injury rates due to their size and inexperience, but they're cheaper to employ than adults. You see children operating dangerous machinery, working in mines, performing tasks that would horrify modern observers, and there's nothing unusual about it. This is simply how things are done. Workers have essentially no legal protections. Employers can fire people without cause, reduce wages arbitrarily, or withhold pay entirely. Those who complain or attempt to organize for better conditions face blacklisting, being marked as troublemakers, whom no other employer in the region will hire. This effectively destroys your ability to work, forcing you to move to a new area where your reputation hasn't preceded you. Company towns, settlements where a single employer owns all housing and businesses, are common in mining and lumber regions. If you work in one of these communities, you quickly discover how total the company's control is. You live in company housing, often crude barracks or small cabins that barely protect you from the elements. You shop at the company store, where prices are inflated far above what you'd pay elsewhere. You might be paid in scrip company currency rather than legal tender. This scrip is only redeemable at the company store, creating a closed economic system that traps you. The system is designed to keep workers in perpetual debt. No matter how hard you work, you can never save enough to leave. Your wages never quite cover your expenses at the company store, so you're always borrowing against future earnings. The debt grows rather than shrinks, binding you to the company as effectively as chains. If you complain, if you try to organize, if you challenge the system in any way, you're fired and evicted immediately. Your family is put out of company housing with no warning, no appeal, no recourse. In remote areas, this can be a death sentence, leaving you stranded miles from any other settlement with no resources and no prospects, whatever work you choose. Frontier labor shapes your existence in profound ways. Your relationship with time changes. Without electric lighting, your active hours are governed by daylight. You wake at dawn or before, work until darkness makes it impossible to continue, then sleep from exhaustion rather than choice. Work isn't measured in 8-hour shifts, but by tasks that must be completed. During harvest or roundup or crucial phases of mining operations, you might work from first light until well after dark for weeks without a break. During slower periods, there might be less work, but also less pay. The concept of punctuality, so central to modern life, has limited relevance on much of the frontier. With few clocks and little need for precise timing in most activities, people operate on approximate schedules. Morning or after dinner are sufficiently specific time designations for most purposes. Stagecoaches and later trains introduce more precise timekeeping, but outside these specific contexts, time remains fluid. Your body becomes both your most valuable asset and your greatest liability. Its strength determines your earning capacity. Its health determines your survival. An injury that would be minor in the modern world, a sprained ankle, a deep cut, a broken finger can end your ability to work and thus your ability to eat. You learn to work through pain, through illness, through conditions that would send modern workers home. There is no sick leave, no disability accommodation. You work or you starve, and the choice is that simple and that brutal dot as days turn to weeks and weeks to months. You begin to understand why frontier people approach life the way they do. The constant labor, the unrelenting hardship, the daily proximity to death, these forge a particular mindset. Stoicism isn't a philosophy out here, but a survival strategy. Complaining accomplishes nothing. Self-pity is a luxury you cannot afford. There's a grim satisfaction in the work, though something that modern people rarely experience. When you've spent the entire day swinging a pick or guiding a plow, when your muscles scream and your hands bleed, when you finally stop as darkness falls, you've accomplished something tangible. You've moved rock, turned earth, built fence, produced something concrete that exists because of your effort. This directness, this immediate connection between labor and result, provides a clarity that's absent from much modern work. There are no abstract quarterly reports, no emails, no meetings about meetings. Just the pick striking stone, the plow turning soil, the hammer driving nails. The work is brutal, but it's honest. You also discover a sense of camaraderie among workers that transcends many social divisions. When you're working alongside someone in dangerous conditions, when your survival might depend on their actions and theirs on yours, superficial differences matter less. A black cowboy, a Chinese rail worker, a Mexican vaquero, a white miner, all suffering together, all depending on each other, all bound by the common struggle to survive another day. This doesn't mean prejudice disappears. It persists, sometimes violently. But in the moment, when a tunnel is collapsing, or a herd is stampeding, or a storm is approaching, what matters is competence and reliability. The person working beside you is a person, not an abstraction. And your shared humanity becomes impossible to ignore as another day of labor ends. You return to your cabin or boarding house, exhausted beyond anything you've previously experienced. Your body is a catalog of aches and pains. Your hands are raw, despite their calluses. Your back feels as if it might never straighten again. Your throat is parched, your stomach empty, your mind numb from fatigue. You eat whatever food is available: beans, biscuits, salt pork, coffee. The meal is functional rather than enjoyable, fuel for a body that will be punished again tomorrow. You might sit with other workers, exchanging few words, because conversation requires energy you don't have. Or you might eat alone, too tired even for company. The darkness comes as a relief. You can finally stop, finally rest, finally let your body recover what it can before morning demands it all begin again. You fall into bed or onto whatever sleeping surface you have, and unconsciousness claims you almost immediately. Before sleep takes you completely, you might wonder how long you can sustain this pace. You've seen what becomes of men who work these jobs for years. Their bodies broken, their health ruined, their futures dim. You wonder if you'll find a better opportunity, a way out of this endless cycle of labor and exhaustion. Or if you'll become like them, used up and discarded, another anonymous casualty of the frontier's insatiable appetite for human effort. But these thoughts don't linger long. Sleep pulls you down, and tomorrow is hours away yet. For now, there's only the blessed relief of rest, however brief it might be. The frontier forgives nothing and rewards few, but it demands everything from everyone. And somehow, you'll rise again when morning comes, because that's what survival requires. You'll face another day of brutal labor, because the alternative is starvation or death. And perhaps, if you're very fortunate and very persistent, you'll eventually find something better. But for now, for most people, this is life on the frontier. Work until you can't, rest until you must, and hope that tomorrow brings something other than more of the same, that another day ends on the frontier. And as the sun sinks below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, you find yourself drawn toward the flickering lights of town. After days of solitary labor or dangerous travel, the human need for connection becomes overwhelming. The frontier may be harsh and unforgiving, but it's not entirely solitary. Communities exist here, fragile and imperfect, bound together by necessity and the shared understanding that survival often depends on the person standing next to you. Tonight, you'll discover what community means in a place where isolation is the norm and trust is earned through action rather than words. As you approach the settlement, you notice how different these communities are from anything you've known. There's no centuries-old infrastructure here, no established institutions with deep roots. Everything is new, improvised, temporary. Buildings stand on hope and determination rather than solid foundations. Social structures are fluid, constantly renegotiated as people arrive, depart, succeed, or fail. The church stands at one end of town, if you can call it a church. It's a simple wooden structure that serves multiple purposes throughout the week. On Sunday, it's a place of worship. On Monday, it might be a schoolhouse. On Tuesday, a meeting hall for discussing community business. On Wednesday, a courtroom where disputes are settled. The building doesn't matter as much as what it represents. The human need for order, meaning and connection, even in chaos. You step inside during an evening gathering, and the scene before you reveals the true diversity of the frontier. Families sit on rough wooden benches, their clothing worn but carefully mended. You see faces from a dozen different backgrounds. German farmers with their distinctive speech patterns. Irish laborers still carrying the accent of the old country. Scandinavian homesteaders with their fair hair and quiet demeanor. You see Mexican families whose ancestors lived here long before it became United States territory. You see black families who've come west seeking freedom from Southern oppression. You see Chinese merchants who've survived the brutal discrimination of railroad camps to establish businesses. This diversity is both the frontier's strength and its source of constant tension. These people don't necessarily like each other. They bring prejudices from their homelands, compete for the same limited resources, and view each other with suspicion born of cultural difference. But they also need each other. When a family's cabin burns down, the community rebuilds it, regardless of who that family is. When someone falls ill, neighbors provide care. When crops fail, Those with surplus share with those without, knowing that next season the situation might be reversed. The preacher or community leader speaks, and you listen to concerns that define frontier life. Water rights are debated with an intensity that might seem absurd to outsiders, but make perfect sense here, where water determines who survives and who doesn't. Grazing boundaries are discussed, because letting your cattle wander onto someone else's claim can lead to violence. Plans for a school are considered, because even in this harsh place, people think about their children's futures. After the meeting ends, someone mentions that there's a dance being organized for Saturday night. This announcement generates genuine excitement, a brightness in tired eyes that speaks to how precious these social occasions are. Frontier life is relentless work with little joy. So when opportunities for celebration arise, they're seized with an enthusiasm that might seem disproportionate. The dance will be held in the largest available space, probably a barn or the general store with its goods temporarily moved aside. Women will spend precious time preparing, perhaps sewing a new dress from carefully hoarded fabric, or at least washing and pressing their best clothing. Men will bathe, a rare enough occurrence to be noteworthy, and perhaps even attempt to tame their wild hair and beards. These dances are more than entertainment. They're marriage markets, social networks, and pressure valves all at once. Young people meet potential spouses under the watchful eyes of the community. Older residents reconnect with friends they might not have seen for weeks or months. Tensions that have been building find release in music and movement rather than violence. The music comes from whoever can play, a fiddler whose instrument has traveled thousands of miles, a harmonica player whose simple tunes carry unexpected emotional weight, perhaps a piano if the town is prosperous enough to have one and someone skilled enough to play it. The songs are familiar, brought from distant homes and adapted to new circumstances. People dance with an intensity born of scarcity, knowing that it might be months before the next opportunity arises. You watch as social hierarchies play out on the dance floor. The successful merchant and his wife hold themselves slightly apart, their clothing finer, their manners more refined. The cowboys and miners dance with an abandon that speaks to their youth and their understanding that they might not survive to see another dance. The farmers move with the same measured efficiency they bring to their work, conserving energy even in celebration. Women are outnumbered here, sometimes dramatically so. This gives them a peculiar form of power, even within a society that legally considers them subordinate. A woman might dance every dance, passed from partner to partner until she's exhausted, while men wait hopefully for a turn. This scarcity makes courtship intense and sometimes competitive, though violence at these events is discouraged by the community, which understands that preserving these rare moments of joy serves everyone's interest. As days pass and you become more familiar with the community, you notice how certain institutions shape frontier life in ways both visible and subtle. The saloon, which you've already visited, is more than just a place to drink. It's a social hub, information exchange, an unofficial courthouse all rolled into one. Here, men gather to share news, conduct business, settle disputes, and sometimes, unfortunately, start fights. The saloon owner is often one of the most influential people in town, privy to everyone's secrets and problems, acting as informal banker, mediator, and confidant. The general store serves a similar function. It's where people come not just to buy goods, but to collect mail, hear news, and socialize. The storekeeper knows everyone's financial situation, their struggles and successes, their hopes and despairs. Credit extended or denied at the general store can determine whether a family survives a difficult season. The bulletin board outside displays notices that tell the story of frontier life. Advertisements for land, rewards for stolen horses, announcements of deaths and births, letters seeking lost relatives. The school, when it exists, represents hope for the future. It's often a single room with one teacher responsible for students ranging from age 5 to 17. The teacher might be barely educated themselves, perhaps having completed 8th grade back east and now passing that knowledge forward. But education, even limited education, is valued. Parents sacrifice to keep children in school for even a few months a year, understanding that literacy and basic mathematics might give their children opportunities they themselves never had. The newspaper, if the town is large enough to support one, shapes public opinion and community identity. The editor is often one of the community's most educated members, though educated is relative. The paper reports local news, reprints stories from Eastern publications weeks or months out of date, and editorializes about community issues. It serves as the town's memory, recording marriages, deaths, business transactions, and significant events that might otherwise be forgotten. One evening, you witness how the community handles conflict when someone is accused of stealing. The accused is a drifter, someone with no ties to the community, which makes the situation more dangerous for him. Without roots, without people willing to vouch for him, he's vulnerable to mob justice. A meeting is called, and you see frontier justice in action. It's not the formal, procedural justice of established legal systems. There might not be a trained lawyer within 100 miles. Instead, the community improvises, drawing on memories of legal proceedings from back east, on common sense, and on the practical need to resolve the situation before it tears the community apart. Evidence is presented, testimony from witnesses, the stolen goods if they've been recovered, character references for both accuser and accused. The process is rough, sometimes prejudiced, and heavily influenced by social standing. A respected merchant's word carries more weight than a transient laborer's. A white man's testimony is believed more readily than a Chinese man's or a Native American's. If the accused is found guilty, punishment is swift. There are no prisons on the frontier, or at best, a simple jail that can hold someone for a few days. Serious crimes result in hanging, usually carried out immediately. Lesser crimes might result in whipping, banishment from the community, or forced restitution. The goal is not rehabilitation, but either deterrence or permanent removal of the threat. If the accused is found innocent, or if doubt remains, they might be released but remain under suspicion. Trust once damaged is difficult to repair in these tight-knit communities where everyone's survival might depend on everyone else. You also see how the community handles disputes between established members, which requires more delicate navigation. When two ranchers disagree about water rights or grazing boundaries, violence is a real possibility. Both men are armed, both have families and allies, and both believe they're in the right. The community intervenes not out of abstract principles of justice, but because a range war would damage everyone. Mediation occurs, with respected community members acting as arbitrators. The goal is compromise, finding a solution both parties can accept even if neither is entirely satisfied. This isn't about right and wrong in an absolute sense, but about maintaining the fragile peace that allows the community to function. Despite the conflicts, despite the prejudices and tensions, you also witness remarkable examples of cooperation and mutual aid. These aren't driven by altruism so much as enlightened self-interest. People help others because they know they'll need help themselves eventually. When a family's breadwinner is injured, unable to work, neighbors organize to bring in their harvest, repair their equipment, ensure they don't starve. This happens regardless of personal feelings about the family. You might not like your neighbor, might disagree with them about politics or religion, but you help them because that's how communities survive out here. Barn raisings exemplify this frontier cooperation. Building a barn is too large a task for a single family, so the community gathers. Men provide labor, using their varied skills in carpentry, masonry, and engineering. Women prepare massive amounts of food to feed the workers. Children run errands and handle smaller tasks. What would take months for one family is accomplished in days through collective effort. These events are also social occasions, opportunities for a community to come together and reaffirm its bonds. There's competition among the workers, good-natured rivalry about who can work faster or more skillfully. There's music and laughter alongside the labor. And when the structure stands complete, there's shared pride in what's been accomplished together. The same pattern repeats with harvests, especially when time is critical. Grain must be cut and stored before rain can ruin it. Teams move from farm to farm, helping each family in turn, knowing that this cooperation benefits everyone. Without it, individual families might lose their entire crop, and everyone would suffer from the resulting scarcity. As weeks pass and you become more embedded in frontier life, you begin to notice changes occurring around you. The frontier is not static. It's transforming, slowly but inexorably, from a wild, loosely organized society into something more structured and permanent. You notice it first in small ways. The dirt streets of the town are being surveyed and graded. Someone has started a petition to have them planked, making them passable even in wet weather. A few buildings are being reconstructed with brick instead of wood, a sign that owners believe the town has a future worth investing in. The church gets a bell, donated by a wealthy rancher, its sound marking time and gathering the faithful with new authority. The railroad, which previously bypassed this area, is planning a spur line. This news transforms everything. Property values change overnight. Businesses that catered to local trade start thinking about larger markets. Farmers who struggled with the cost of transporting goods to distant markets suddenly see profitability. The isolation that defined frontier life is ending. For better and worse, with the railroad comes more rapid change. Manufactured goods become more available and affordable. Women can order clothing and household items from catalogs. Farmers can purchase better tools and equipment. But local craftsmen who made these goods by hand find themselves unable to compete with factory products. The self-sufficient frontier economy begins integrating into national and even international markets. Banks establish branches, bringing formal financial services, but also new forms of economic control. Farmers who previously operated on informal credit arrangements with the general store now deal with bankers, who care only about collateral and interest payments. Some prosper under this new system, able to borrow for improvements that increase productivity. Others fall into debt traps, losing land they thought they'd secured through years of labor. Telegraph lines follow the railroad, connecting the frontier to the rest of the nation in real time. News that once took weeks or months to arrive now comes in hours. The town learns of presidential elections, major disasters, and international events almost as quickly as people back east. This connection to the wider world changes psychology and identity. The frontier feels less like a separate place and more like a remote extension of established civilization. Large corporations begin asserting control over resources. Mining operations that started as individual prospectors staking claims are consolidated into industrial enterprises. Small ranchers find themselves competing with vast cattle companies backed by Eastern or European capital. The era of the independent pioneer gives way to corporate agriculture and extraction. Government presence increases. Territorial or state authorities that previously existed mainly in theory, start exercising real power. Federal marshals become more common. Courts operate with greater regularity and formality. The informal justice of community meetings is replaced by bureaucratic legal proceedings. For some, this represents welcome stability and fairness. For others, it's unwanted interference in local affairs. The Native American presence, already diminished by displacement and violence, continues to shrink. Reservations that were supposed to be permanent become temporary when valuable resources are discovered. Treaties are renegotiated or simply ignored. The frontier's transformation into settled territory requires, in the minds of those driving the change, the complete removal or assimilation of indigenous peoples. You begin to understand that you're witnessing the end of something, the closing of a chapter in American history. The Wild West, as a distinct phenomenon, has a limited lifespan. The conditions that created it, vast unsettled territories, minimal government presence, abundant resources seemingly free for the taking, are disappearing. The census of 1890 will declare the frontier officially closed, though this is more symbolic than actual. Remote areas will retain frontier characteristics for decades more. But the overall trend is clear. The United States is running out of empty land to settle, though, of course, it was never truly empty, only emptied through displacement of its original inhabitants. This transformation brings mixed feelings among frontier residents. Some embrace it eagerly, tired of hardship and danger, ready for the comforts and security of civilization. They look forward to schools that operate year-round, doctors with real training, law enforcement that doesn't depend on vigilantes, infrastructure that makes life easier. Others view the changes with suspicion or sadness. They came west precisely to escape the constraints of settled society. They valued the freedom, however harsh, to live on their own terms. The arriving civilization brings not just amenities, but rules, regulations, social hierarchies, and loss of independence. The rough equality of the frontier, where a person's worth was measured by their skills and character rather than their background or wealth, is being replaced by more stratified social structures. The mythology making has already begun. Even as the actual frontier disappears, its romanticized version is being constructed. Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West shows tour eastern cities and eventually Europe, presenting staged reenactments of frontier life that bear little resemblance to reality. These shows are enormously popular, offering audiences a sanitized, exciting version of the West. Heroic cowboys, dramatic gunfights, savage Indians defeated by civilization's advance. Dime novels flood the market, churning out formulaic stories about Western heroes who never existed or bearing only passing resemblance to real figures. The actual frontier, with its disease, poverty, backbreaking labor, and moral ambiguity, is being replaced by a mythological West where good triumphs over evil through violence and individual courage. This mythology serves purposes beyond entertainment. It provides justification for what was done to indigenous peoples, framing displacement and cultural destruction as necessary steps in civilization's advance. It celebrates American exceptionalism, suggesting that the frontier experience forged a unique national character defined by independence, courage, and resourcefulness. It obscures the role of corporations, government, and systematic exploitation in Western development, instead emphasizing individual achievement. As your time on the frontier draws to a close, you find yourself changed by the experience. Your body has adapted to some extent, muscles strengthened by constant labor, skin toughened by sun and wind, hands calloused from tools and work. But you also carry injuries that will never fully heal, scars both visible and internal. Your understanding of human nature has deepened. You've seen remarkable generosity and shocking cruelty, often from the same people. You've witnessed communities coming together in times of crisis and tearing themselves apart over trivial disputes. You've learned that survival requires both cooperation and ruthlessness, compassion and hardness. In measures that depend on circumstances, you've gained respect for the people who built the frontier, not the mythological heroes of later fiction, but the actual men, women, and children who endured conditions that would break most modern people. Their achievement wasn't the gunfights and gold strikes of legend, but the daily act of persistence in the face of overwhelming difficulty. At the same time, you've seen the costs of this expansion. The environmental damage, Forests clear-cut, rivers polluted, soil exhausted, wildlife populations devastated. The human toll. Indigenous peoples displaced and destroyed. Immigrant laborers exploited and discarded. Families broken by death and distance. Communities marked by violence and disease. The frontier experience, you realize, resists simple moral judgments. It was neither purely heroic nor purely tragic, but something more complex, a chapter in human history that reveals both the remarkable adaptability of people under pressure and the terrible costs of that adaptation. As you prepare to leave the frontier, to return to the modern world, or simply to move forward in time, you contemplate what legacy this period leaves behind. Physically, the frontier established the infrastructure of the American West, the towns and cities, the farms and ranches, the roads and rail lines, the systems of water management and resource extraction. The map was filled in. Previously indigenous lands converted to private property under American law. Territorial boundaries solidified into states, legally and politically. The frontier shaped American institutions in ways that persist. Water law in the West still reflects frontier-era compromises and conflicts. Property rights, mineral rights, grazing rights, all these were defined during this period in response to conditions that no longer exist, but whose legacy remains. Culturally, the frontier mythology became central to American identity. The image of the rugged individual triumphing through self-reliance. The notion that Americans are somehow different from other peoples because of the frontier experience. The celebration of westward expansion as manifest destiny. These ideas, however questionable, deeply influence American culture and politics even today. For indigenous peoples, the frontier era represents catastrophe. Population collapse, cultural disruption, land loss, forced assimilation. The policies and actions of this period created trauma that reverberates through generations. The struggle for sovereignty, cultural preservation, and justice continues, rooted in what was done during the frontier era. The environmental legacy is equally profound. Species driven to extinction or near extinction. Ecosystems fundamentally altered. Resources extracted without thought for sustainability. The frontier mentality of inexhaustible abundance led to exploitation whose consequences we're still grappling with. Your last night on the frontier. You sit outside your cabin or lean against a fence post, watching the stars emerge. The sky here is incomparable, unpolluted by the light and smog of future cities. The Milky Way stretches overhead in all its glory. The same sky that guided travelers gave comfort to the lonely and connected people across vast distances. You think about the question that brought you here. Could you survive in the Wild West? After experiencing it, you understand that survival wasn't a simple matter of toughness or skills, though both helped. It required a specific mindset, acceptance of hardship and uncertainty that modern life doesn't cultivate. It required the ability to endure discomfort, to work through exhaustion, to face death as a constant possibility without being paralyzed by fear. Most importantly, it required understanding that you couldn't survive alone. The myth of the lone frontiersman notwithstanding, survival depended on community, on the networks of mutual aid and cooperation that people created despite their differences and conflicts. The strongest survived, not because they were solitary, but because they were connected. As you drift towards sleep for the final time in this era, you hear the familiar sounds, wind through grass or trees, distant animal calls, perhaps the faint piano from a saloon, or the cry of a child from a nearby cabin. These sounds, which once seemed strange and unsettling, have become familiar. You've adapted, which is what humans do. Tomorrow, you'll leave the frontier behind, carrying with you a deeper understanding of American history, a greater appreciation for modern comforts and security, and a more nuanced view of the people who lived through this era. They were neither the heroes of mythology nor simple victims of circumstance, but complex human beings navigating impossible conditions as best they could, making choices that seemed right or necessary at the time, building something new while destroying something old. The Wild West, stripped of its romantic mythology, reveals fundamental truths about human nature, about what we're capable of enduring and what we're capable of inflicting, about the resilience of the human spirit and the terrible costs of that resilience. It shows us that history is not made by heroes and villains, but by ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, making decisions with limited information and fewer good options, trying to survive and perhaps, if they're lucky, to build something that lasts. As sleep finally claims you, the boundary between past and present blurs. The challenges faced by frontier communities managing scarce resources, building functional societies among diverse populations, balancing individual freedom with collective needs, stewarding the environment while extracting what's needed for survival, remain relevant today in different forms. Perhaps that's the frontier's truest legacy, not the mythology of cowboys and gunfights, but the ongoing struggle to create communities that can sustain both people and the land they depend on. The stars shine brilliantly above, eternal and indifferent, witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Wild West is passing into history and myth, but its echoes will resound through centuries, shaping how Americans understand themselves and their nation's story, for better and for worse, in ways both recognized and invisible.